The most successful closers that I know do not use scripts. They use a framework that adapts to the conversation like water adapts to a container. And in this video, I'm going to break down the framework that I've used, close well over 100 million in sales. This is the exact framework that I teach all of my students. I'm going to give you a high-level overview from start to finish so you can basically implement it on your next sales call. So let's get into it. Most sales training out there is a very rigid structure. It'll be like question, question, question. If someone gives you this objection, use this script. If someone gives you this objection, use this script. I did that for a while in the beginning, and the issue is when you have any sort of high-level prospect or someone who knows what you're doing, someone who gives you a question that doesn't really fit within your rigid script structure, guess what? The call goes horribly. Humans are not predictable. So having a framework allows you to adapt to human behavior and adapt to where the conversation's going, where the prospect wants to take you, but you're maintaining a level of control without a rigid scripted structure. So this is built around listening more than anything. Strategic listening, active listening. It's based around pattern recognition and understanding where you're at in the call. Let me start by clarifying something extremely critical. So a script tells you what to say. A framework tells you how to think. A script is pretty linear. It's like question 1, question 2, question 3, pitch, close, objections, right? A framework's a little bit more dynamic. It's like listen to the prospect, identify the pattern, choose which path you're going to take and adapt in real time. Sometimes that means you're even handling objections halfway through the discovery process. I guess an analogy here, like following a script is like being brand new to a city and following a set of directions that you've downloaded from Google. But having a framework is like being with a local and knowing landmarks and shortcuts and ways to get around that city way quicker. What I'm about to show you is what I use on every high ticket sales call. It's what I call the anti-sales method because it doesn't feel like selling. You don't feel like a traditional salesperson. If you're going to implement this, I want you to be as far away from a typical salesperson as humanly possible. This ultimately just feels like getting clarity. When a prospect gets clarity and certainty, they basically close themselves. So the anti-sales method, what I'm going to go through with you today is 7 key elements of it. Key elements that you can just take away. Now these are elements, these are not steps. Questions are going to ultimately change on the answers that the prospect gives you. So the first element is situation. Now, before you understand someone fully, you need to understand the world. Depending on what you're selling, you need to understand where they work, how much they've been earning, how long they've been doing it for. You need to have real context on this person because you can't treat every prospect the same. With this situation, you're trying to basically just paint the picture of what their life looks like. So you have an understanding, and that understanding is going to help you to understand where there's potential holes. You need to basically understand the current reality and then peg that against where they want to be. And that's ultimately how you build a gap between the two and start to understand any incongruencies or any areas that don't make sense, and later in the call you're going to dig into those, but without this initial context it's going to be very hard. So the second element, and potentially one of the most important, is going to be a clear outcome and a desired state. This is where a lot of closers make massive mistakes because they'll ask a question like, what's your goal at the minute? Where do you want to be in 12 months time? And the prospect will give a vague answer like, I want financial freedom. Or they might say, I want to earn more money. Or they might say, I want to quit my job. But these ultimately are not outcomes. These are not desired states. These are just vague, surface level aspirations. Your job is to ultimately get them to articulate what that actually means to them. So if someone says, I want financial freedom, I'm saying like, well, I guess what does freedom actually look like to you though, like day to day? And in response to that, I'm like, okay, why is that important? How does that change things? How does that make things different than they are right now? Who else does this impact? And what does, I guess, achieving that end result actually do for you personally? These are all like probing questions, right? These are what enable us to go beneath the surface. I teach something called the sales iceberg, which we can do in another video, but it's going below that surface level with your questioning so you can probe deeper and deeper and deeper into what that desired state feels like for the prospect. So when we go to clear outcome and desired state, the key aspect is below the surface level. And ultimately, we want them to feel that desired state. Okay, and moving on to point 3, this will be pain of current situation. This is where the real discovery happens. Most people book a sales call not even realizing that they're in some sort of pain, right? Maybe it's way in the recess of the subconscious. And your role as a closer is to hold up the mirror. What I mean by hold up the mirror is ask Socratic questioning to dig deeper into why their current situation might not be serving them and how that's affecting them, how that's affecting where they want to go, who else is that affecting, what's that been like for them, etc. Your job is to help them understand the weight of what they're currently carrying. And I usually open up this section with questions like, what is it about your current situation that might not be enough anymore? I phrase it like this, and there's so many different ways you can do it, but I try to soften that initial response. I try to not make any presumptions too early and say something like, what is it that you hate about your current job, right? Because people will get defensive. So I like to soften it to begin with, and then I'll go deeper and deeper and deeper as we go through. So I like to open the pain section with something along the lines of, what is it about your current situation that might not be enough anymore? Now, I phrase it like this because I don't want to make any presumptions here, because people will get defensive if you make presumptions. So if you say something like, what is it that you don't like about your current job? They might say, I never said I didn't like it. People often even defend bad current situations just because they don't like salespeople to put words in their mouth. But once I've had that soft opening question, I will uncover further layers as I go through the pain process by saying things like, what's that stopping you from doing? How long has it been this way for? Who else does this impact? What does this stop you from doing that you'd like to do? And through questioning like that, that's how you'll get that emotional depth. The thing is here, you're not just extracting information, you're allowing them to see real problems and holding up that mirror for them and allowing them to articulate it by asking the right questions, because once they see it for what it is, they can't unsee it, okay? So if someone's been in the same job for 5 years that they haven't really liked, they haven't really been earning the sort of money that they want, they haven't been able to do the things that they actually want to do, this could be the first time they're actually talking about it openly, and once they've said it, they're like, oh yeah, it is actually quite shit. That's sort of the response you're looking for in the pain section. I teach something called the staircase framework, which you'll be able to see in some of my earlier videos, where I use structured questions after each point to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So this would be like what-based questions, why-based questions, how-based questions, and impact. Go and have a look at an earlier video, and I'm sure you'll find it in there. But through my mentorship, which some of you may be on, some of you might not be, I basically go really in depth with this so you can have the most impactful conversations with people, because ultimately, logic, features, benefits, they don't drive sales, emotion does. Okay, the fourth element here is consequence. Once they've seen the pain of the current situation, there's only one thing that humans run further away from than current pain, and that is the avoidance of future pain. You know yourself that the thought of something bad coming is 10 times worse than the actual experience of something bad. But this isn't just fear mongering, this is just giving them a bit of a reality check, right? Like, if you've been in this situation for X amount of time, what if you continue in this situation for the same amount of time? What's that like? How does that change? Do you get to where you want to be? Are you the person you want to be? Etc. The aim here is to not create fear, it's to create clarity and give the prospect clarity that they need to move forward. Now, I'm going to dive in here because some of you might already know some of these elements and thinking this is nothing new. I get it, okay? All sales processes are pretty similar. However, this is not a script, okay? The way I teach is pain might come first, then desire might come. These are interchangeable, and you shouldn't be diving into consequence straight after pain, because you need something else before you go into consequence, and that is the fifth element, which is limiting beliefs. We all have limiting beliefs, whether you know it or not. You probably tell yourself a story for the reason you are where you want to be in life. we also all have patterns of behaviour that we aren't really aware of, that we do on a daily basis that potentially could be holding us back. And it's our job as a closer to point them out, to pull them out of the hat and call them out as the villain in the room, whether that's fear, whether that's procrastination, whether that's hesitancy, whether it's lack of action, whatever it is, you need to pull it out of the hat and call it out and point it out as the villain in the room. Because guess what? If you don't, guess what the objection is going to be? And it's going to be so much harder to deal with because there's a price attached to it. Especially if it's a fear-based one. Guess what increases when you also ask someone for $5 grand? Do you think it's less fear or more fear? It's a hell of a lot more. So we deal with it in the discovery, so we don't have to deal with it later. Or if we do have to deal with it, it's 10 times easier. But it's really important here. What a lot of people will do is give you external. We want them to take internal responsibility for it. So you might ask someone a question like, you seem like a really clever lady. In your opinion, why do you feel like you aren't already at that desired state, a cleared outcome? And they'll say, well, Charles, I've not really had the time. We're not taking that. We want to challenge them and say, okay, would you agree or disagree that there are people who have got less time than you or similar amount of time than you that did make it work in this time frame? And they'll go, yeah. And you'll say, okay, so I guess if we look at this together internally, why do you feel like you haven't? And that's when you should hopefully get the real limiting belief or the real pattern of behaviour that's been holding them back so far. But then here's where the transformation starts. You need to ultimately get them to let go of it and admit that they're going to let go of it. By you might ask someone a question like, you seem like a really clever lady. In your opinion, why do you feel like you aren't already at that desired state, a cleared outcome? And they'll say, well, Charles, I've not really had the time. We're not taking that. We want to challenge them and say, okay, would you agree or disagree that there are people who have got less time than you or similar amount of time than you that did make it work in this time frame? And they'll go, yeah. And you'll say, okay, so I guess if we look at this together internally, why do you feel like you haven't? And that's when you should hopefully get the real limiting belief or the real pattern of behaviour that's been holding them back so far. But then here's where the transformation starts. You need to ultimately get them to let go of it and admit that they're going to let go of it by, again, layers of questioning, asking what happens if they hold on to it or what they've potentially left on the table during this time frame when this limitation or this pattern has been happening. Have they left 100k on the table? Have they left 200k? How much time with the family have they left on the table while this limiting belief has been happening? This is really where the transformation happens, because once they start seeing their patterns of behaviour, the pain of the current situation, this is when the shift in their mind starts thinking, okay, this is starting to make a little bit of sense here as to I need to make a change ASAP. And element 6 is going to be identity. Here's the truth, right? People don't buy solutions and products. People don't buy Lamborghinis. People don't buy Rolexes. People buy what products and services make them become in their own mind. Ultimately, a Rolex is a watch, right? But who do you become once you start wearing a Rolex? You become perceived to be as a wealthier individual. You feel proud of yourself because you've achieved it. That's ultimately what the Rolex is. And a lot of these services allow people to step into a version of themselves that they want to become. So the version of them at their desired state, at their desired outcome, how do they think differently? How do they take actions? What have they potentially been doing that the prospect hasn't been doing right now? We want them to step into that version of themselves on the call, and that's gonna allow us to guide them to a decision so much easier. But the most important aspect here is, what does the prospect have to let go of so they can become that person? And that'll often loop back into the limiting beliefs and really cement that they need to let go of this fear or this procrastination or this lack of action. And the 7th and final element is going to be why now. So the final element is creating that level of urgency. Some people create manufactured scarcity, like we've only got 5 spaces remaining, we've only got 2 spaces. That's not what we're looking for here. We're looking for emotional urgency. Like, why does this actually matter now? What I like to do is challenge people here and be like, you've been in this place for 12 months already. Why not just stay in it? You can do. You're pretty comfortable. Why make a change? What's the point? Why not just delay it for another 3 months? Why not keep doing some more research, you know? And it's like that challenging tone will allow the prospect to justify why they really need to make a change right now. A key important thing here that a lot of closers miss, when you ask a why now question and they say, well, I've been in this place for too long, or they give you any sort of response, you need to go one layer deeper. You need to say, why is that a problem? Or why is that important to you? Or X, Y, Z. Don't take just one level of answer to a why now question as that you've actually done your job, because you haven't. And once they've pointed out why this matters now, they've pretty much closed themselves. Your job now is to just guide them to a decision through a well-crafted pitch. There might be some little objections at the end, but if you hit all of these 7 notes perfectly, you've pretty much got the prospect to close themselves at this point. Now, I'm going to give you a bonus here of 3 key dials that, when applied to these 7 key elements of a sales call, make you bulletproof. The first dial that you need to be an expert at is tonality. You need to understand when to be concerned. You need to understand when to be curious. You need to understand when to be certain. You need to understand when to be confused. You need to be an expert at tonality, because what matters just as much as what you say is how you say it. How you say it allows you to convey what your intention behind the question is. And if you can convey a certain intention, you're going to get a completely different response. The second is pacing. Pacing your questions makes you more authentic. It enables you to create real emotional weight and depth. Like, let me give you an example. Let's say you're in the consequence phase and you've got some limiting beliefs and they said fear's been holding them back. You would pace the question like this. John, have you given it any thought as to what happens if you continue to hold on to this fear? Continue letting it stop you get to where you want to go? That's pacing, right? You're pacing out your questions to create that like emotional depth to your question. And the third is pressure. Now, I'm not talking about your typical salesperson type of pressure. I'm talking about your ability to challenge people. If something is off and it's not making sense, you need to have that ability to create that pressure to allow them to open up and to successfully hold up that mirror. Ultimately, the difference between a 5K a month closer and a 50K a month closer, some very minor tweaks. But ultimately, it comes down to framework mastery. Scripts just box you in, like every other closer, pretty much. You're never going to get to that elite level if you're relying on a script. And my anti-sales method, it's not really about memorizing questions. It's about understanding the psychology that happens behind real change. Ultimately, I don't want you to be a salesperson. I want you to be a facilitator of change. That's how 100 million gets closed. It's not through manipulation, it's through offering people clarity and actually helping people. If you want to go deeper into this framework, you want to learn more, you want complete guidance of landing remote high ticket sales roles, mastering frameworks, being in a badass community full of other closers, then just drop me a DM or book a call below and we can chat about it in a bit more detail. And if this added value, please subscribe, drop me a comment. Would love to hear your thoughts. There's more breakdowns coming like this every single week. Ciao.